It was raining the night she found it, a shivering ball of orange fur on her doorstep, soaked and trembling under the dim porch light. Its small cries pierced through the storm, weak yet desperate, calling for something, someone, to care. Elena bent down, her old hands shaking, and wrapped it in her faded wool shawl. "Poor thing," she whispered, pressing it gently to her chest. "You're safe now." She didn't know then that what she held was not a kitten, but a secret from the wild itself. The storm had been raging for hours, the kind that made the world blur into grey. Elena was about to close her windows when she heard it, that soft, broken meow. There it was, tiny, orange, and trembling in a puddle by her doorstep. Without thinking, she rushed out, her slippers sinking into the mud as she scooped the creature up. Its fur was rougher than she expected, and its eyes, too bright, too knowing for a kitten. Inside, the little one nestled against her heartbeat, its tail curling tightly around her fingers. Elena found a small towel and began drying it carefully, humming an old lullaby she hadn't sung in years. When the power went out, she lit a candle, its flickering light dancing on the fur that glowed like embers. "You'll be called Sunny," she said softly, smiling through the dim light. "Because you bring color back." Sunny purred, or tried to, and for the first time in a long while, the old house didn't feel empty. That night, as rain whispered against the roof, Sunny crept closer to her neck. Elena fell asleep to the rhythm of its tiny breaths, unaware that something wild stirred beneath that orange coat. Outside, unseen eyes watched from the forest edge, their glow matching the little one's. The rain slowed, and the air grew still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. A new bond had formed, delicate yet destined to echo far beyond the storm. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, painting golden lines across the floor. Sunny stretched, yawned, and blinked at the new world around him. Elena chuckled softly, watching the little creature stumble on wobbly legs. She placed a saucer of milk beside the fire and smiled as he drank eagerly. For the first time in years, she felt needed again. Yet even in that peaceful morning, something felt strange. Sunny didn't play like most kittens. He moved with sharpness, with purpose. He listened to every sound, tail twitching at the faintest rustle. Sometimes he'd stare out the window, eyes locked on the woods beyond. It was as if part of him belonged somewhere else, but Elena didn't question it. Not yet. She just let him be, loving him as he was. She mended her garden, hummed to herself, and Sunny followed her everywhere. Neighbors began smiling again when they saw her walking with her cat. They didn't know that nature itself had sent her a companion unlike any other. Weeks passed and Sunny grew fast. Too fast for a kitten. His legs lengthened, his snout sharpened, and his ears stood taller. Sometimes Elena caught a glint of something wild in his gaze. She'd laugh it off, saying, "You're just special, aren't you?" But the forest behind her house seemed to whisper otherwise. At night, strange sounds echoed. Rustles, distant cries, the pad of unseen paws. Sunny would perk up, pacing near the door, tail low and restless. Elena would hush him, thinking he missed other strays. She didn't see how his body tensed, ready to run to the woods, but he stayed, because she was his world now. The nights grew quieter, heavier. Sometimes, Elena swore she saw shapes move beyond the tree line. Yellow eyes flickered, then vanished. Sunny would press close to her leg, as if protecting her. Whatever called him, he refused to answer. Sunny became her shadow, always near, always watching. He sat by her as she painted, as she made tea, as she read. Sometimes she'd talk to him for hours about her husband, her youth, her loneliness. He'd listen, not like a pet, but like a friend. She began to believe he truly understood her words. Elena decided to make him a collar, woven from red thread and an old bell. "Now you'll never get lost," she said, tying it gently around his neck. Sunny tilted his head, the bell jingling faintly. For the first time she saw something almost human in his eyes, gratitude, and something deeper, love. That night, when she coughed and grew dizzy, Sunny stayed by her pillow. He licked her hand and whined softly when her breathing faltered. Elena smiled weakly. "Don't worry, my boy. I'll be fine." But the bell around his neck rang faintly in the dark, a sound that echoed like a promise between two souls. A storm returned weeks later, as if replaying the night they met. Thunder rolled, and Sunny stood at the window, hackles raised. Elena followed his gaze. Something was out there, near the trees. A shape, large and silent, with eyes like burning gold. Then, in a flash of lightning, it was gone. Elena shut the window quickly, heart pounding. "Probably a wolf," she whispered, though wolves hadn't been seen in years. Sunny growled low, a sound too deep for a cat his size. His fur bristled, tail puffed, and he stood guard all night. Every clap of thunder made his bell ring, a warning in the dark. When morning came, muddy tracks led up to the porch. They weren't human, nor feline. They were wild and sharp. Elena traced them with trembling fingers. "Who's been visiting us, Sunny?" she murmured. But Sunny only pressed against her leg, eyes fixed on the forest's edge. Months passed. Sunny had grown, larger than any house cat. His fur burned brighter under the sun, his muzzle narrow, elegant. Strangers who visited stared in disbelief. "That's no cat," one whispered. "That's a fox." Elena laughed nervously. "Oh, don't be silly. He's just unique." But that night, she couldn't ignore it anymore. When she called his name, he didn't meow. He barked, sharp and clear. The sound startled them both. Sunny froze, as if realizing his secret had slipped out. And in that silence, truth filled the room like a cold wind. Elena knelt beside him, tears welling, but not from fear. She cupped his face gently, smiling through the ache. "So that's who you are," she whispered, "my beautiful wild boy." Sunny licked her cheek, his tail wagging softly. Nothing changed. If anything, their bond grew stronger. Word spread quickly. "The widow's keeping a fox," they said. "It's dangerous." Elena ignored them, though whispers followed wherever she went. Children peeked through her fence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fiery creature, but Sunny stayed hidden, sensing the unease around them. One morning, a man from the village came knocking. "You can't keep a wild animal," he said sternly. "It's the law." Elena's hands shook as she clutched the doorframe. "He's not wild to me," she said. "He's family." The man sighed and left, but his eyes promised trouble. That night, Sunny sat by her side as she wept silently. He placed his paw on her hand, his gaze steady and warm. "You're all I have," she whispered, and for once she wasn't sure if she was saying it to a pet or a soul. Outside, the forest wind howled in agreement. Autumn came, painting the woods in gold and crimson. Elena's health began to wane, her steps slower, her breath shorter. She spent most days wrapped in a blanket, Sunny curled against her feet. He refused to leave her side, even to hunt. Sometimes, she'd wake to find him watching her, worried, aware. One evening, she lit a fire and called him close. "Do you know," she said softly, "you've made my life bright again?" Sunny leaned against her chest, listening to her heartbeat fade beneath his ear. "Promise me," she whispered, "that you'll live, even when I can't." He whined, pressing closer, refusing to understand. Outside, the leaves fell gently, like 1,000 tiny goodbyes. The house glowed with firelight, warm against the chill of approaching winter. Elena smiled faintly, eyes heavy with peace. "You were never meant to be mine," she murmured, "but I was meant to find you." And somewhere deep in his chest, the fox's heart broke for the first time. The next morning was too quiet. The fire had gone cold, and the light felt wrong. Sunny nudged her arm, then her cheek, but she didn't move. He cried out, a sound raw and trembling, half growl, half grief. The echo of it carried through the forest like a wound. He stayed there for hours, curled beside her still form. Neighbors came when they noticed no smoke rising from her chimney. When they opened the door, Sunny hissed and backed away, refusing to leave her. The villagers stood in silence, tears in their eyes. Even they couldn't deny the loyalty that burned before them. When they buried her beneath the oak behind her home, Sunny watched from afar. The bell she'd tied around his neck jingled softly in the wind. He didn't cry again, he just sat there, waiting as days became weeks. The house grew empty, but the forest began to call once more. And one night, when the moon rose full, he finally stood and walked toward it. The forest welcomed him like an old friend. His paws sank into earth he somehow remembered. Yet every rustle, every scent reminded him of her. He hunted, ran, lived, but always returned to her grave at dusk. The bell around his neck had dulled, but its sound still lingered. Seasons passed, the house decayed, vines crawling up its walls. Travelers sometimes swore they saw an orange shadow on the hill, a fox that guarded the old woman's home, never leaving. They'd hear its faint cry at night, not wild, not lonely, just longing. It was said he waited for her spirit, beneath the oak where love was buried. And when spring finally bloomed, the wild sang softly again. Sunlight poured over the grave, warming the earth like a gentle touch. The fox lay beside it, eyes half closed, as if dreaming of her hand. They said the bell rang one last time, a farewell carried on the wind. And then the sound faded, leaving only peace. Years passed, and Elena's house became silent but not forgotten. Villagers avoided it, saying they felt watched from the woods. Yet sometimes, in the early dawn, smoke rose from the chimney. No one dared to check, they only whispered, "The fox keeps it warm." Legends grew like vines around her memory. Children told tales of a spirit fox that guarded the lonely. Travelers left offerings by the old oak, flowers, candles, whispers. Some said they'd seen a glowing figure beside the grave at night. Others swore the fox's eyes shone like twin suns in the dark. And in the quiet, the bell still chimed, faint and eternal. Inside the crumbling house, a single chair stood by the window. The fox often rested there, staring at the road she once walked. The wood creaked beneath his weight, but he never moved much. Every breath he took was a memory of her warmth. Every heartbeat, a promise he'd never break. Winter returned with its cruel stillness and biting air. Snow blanketed the earth, erasing paths, softening the world. The fox's paws left faint prints leading only to her grave. He curled beside it, his fiery coat a flicker against the white. Above him, the old oak groaned beneath the frost. Hunger gnawed at him, but he refused to leave. He'd look toward the house, expecting her to call, "Come in, Sonny." But only the wind answered, cold, distant, and hollow. Each night, the forest howled, and he answered back softly, not as a beast, but as something broken. When the storm finally ceased, a hush fell upon the woods. A traveler passing through found strange tracks, circles in the snow. In their center lay a fox, unmoving but peaceful. He thought it dead until he saw the faint rise of breath, and around its neck, a small red thread and a bell, rusted but unbroken. The traveler returned to the village, telling what he'd seen, an orange fox guarding a grave through the storm. Some laughed it off, others went pale, whispering her name, the old woman who'd once tamed the wild, and the creature who never left her side. Moved by the story, the traveler returned the next dawn. He left food by the grave, unsure if it was still alive. When he looked back from the trees, the food was gone. Only the faint sound of a bell answered him. He smiled. Some bonds, he thought, even death can't untie. From then on, others followed his example. They left fruit, bread, flowers, and candles in the snow. Each morning, something, someone, took them away. The village no longer feared the house on the hill. They began to call it the foxkeeper's home. When spring came, the forest awoke with a new song. Birds returned, rivers ran, and life stirred beneath the soil. The fox walked deeper into the woods, drawn by a strange instinct. Other foxes appeared, wild, wary, but curious. He was one of them, yet different, gentler, older. He didn't chase or fight. He watched, learned, remembered. The wild accepted him, but part of him stayed tethered to her. Sometimes he'd lead young foxes to the hill at dusk. They'd sit in silence before the grave, as if listening. The forest began to hum with quiet reverence. The villagers noticed the change, fewer pests, richer soil. "Maybe the fox blesses us," they said. And deep within the woods, under golden light, the orange fox lifted his head and howled softly. It wasn't hunger or warning, it was gratitude. Years later, a little girl named Mira wandered into the woods. She carried a lantern, chasing fireflies beyond the garden fence. When she lost her way, she began to cry softly. Then, from the shadows, 2 amber eyes appeared. She froze, but the fox didn't attack. He stepped forward slowly, bell chiming with every move. Mira gasped, then whispered, "You're beautiful." The fox circled her once, then turned toward the path. It stopped, looking back, waiting for her to follow, and somehow she understood. He led her safely home before dawn. Her parents found her standing by the gate, unharmed, glowing. When asked what saved her, she only said, "The orange cat." But the villagers knew better, and their hearts ached. The fox had saved another soul, just as she once saved his. Time blurred like mist through the valley. The house collapsed, but the grave remained untouched. The oak grew taller, its roots weaving around her resting place. Each autumn, fox tracks circled the hill, neat and deliberate. People began calling it the Hill of Bonds. Old women told children the story by firelight. They said the fox was Elena's spirit keeper, and that every soul who loved without condition was watched over by the glow of his eyes in the dark. The tale became a prayer for the lonely. Even hunters avoided that forest, not from fear, but from reverence. They'd leave food at the hill's base before each winter, and when they heard the faint ring of a bell, they'd bow their heads. The wild had become sacred. One moonlit night, the fox dreamed again. He was small once more, drenched, trembling under her porch light. He felt her arms lift him, warm and trembling with kindness. He heard her whisper his name, Sonny, and for the first time in years he felt safe again. When he woke, the forest was silent, no wind, no sound. A scent filled the air, familiar, human, gentle. He turned and there she was, standing in moonlight, younger, radiant, smiling the way he remembered. "Hello, my boy," she said softly. He stepped forward, but she was already fading. Her voice lingered, like a breeze through leaves. "Thank you for keeping your promise." He tilted his head, eyes glistening, and when dawn broke, he was gone from the hill. No one saw the orange fox again after that. Only his tracks remained, circling the oak one final time. Moss grew over the stones, and the bell rusted into silence. But each spring, the wildflowers bloomed brighter on that grave, as if love itself fed the earth. The villagers tended the site every year. They built a small wooden marker beside it, Elena and Sonny. Beneath, someone carved, "A love that tamed the wild." Children left flowers there, believing their wishes would be heard, and somehow they always were. At night, when the forest glowed with fireflies, some swore they saw 2 silhouettes, woman and fox, walking side by side. Others said it was only mist and moonlight, but those who listened closely heard a faint jingle on the wind, the sound of love that never died. Decades later, an old man returned to the village. He'd once been the traveler who found the fox in the snow. He sat beneath the oak, notebook in hand, eyes wet with memory. "I've seen many things," he murmured, "but none like this." And he began to write their story. He wrote of a woman who saw beauty where others saw danger, of a creature who learned love from a human heart, of how that love changed an entire village and the forest itself. He wrote not as legend, but as truth. Because love, he thought, is the only truth that endures. When he finished, he placed the notebook by the grave. Wind turned its pages gently, like invisible fingers reading. The bell, though buried in moss, rang faintly once more. He smiled through tears. "Rest well, you two," and left, leaving their story for the world to remember. On the 100th spring since Elena's passing, the forest bloomed brighter than ever. Petals of orange and gold covered the ground like fire. The villagers called it the year of the fox flowers. At night, the glow could be seen from miles away, a shimmer like a soul made of sunlight. An old child's rhyme survived through generations. If you find love beneath the oak, listen close before you go. The bell will ring, the wild will sigh, for hearts like theirs will never die. And sometimes, when the rain returns after years of calm, villagers swear they hear it again. A soft mewl beneath the thunder, a faint jingle of a bell, and two figures walking together through the storm's edge. An old woman and her orange fox. The story of the orange fox spread beyond the valley. Travelers carried it to distant towns, to cities that had forgotten silence. They told of a widow and her wild friend, bound by love, not blood. Children listened wide-eyed. Poets wept quietly as they wrote. The legend began to outlive its tellers. Artists painted the hill beneath the oak, always glowing in amber light. Some said those paintings blessed the homes they entered. Others claimed they heard faint jingles when looking too long. But no one could deny the peace those images brought. It was as if the fox's spirit watched from every brushstroke. Even scholars came to study the tale. How could a wild thing love so purely? They asked. But the elders of the village only smiled. You asked the wrong question, they said. The wonder isn't that it loved her, it's that she loved it first. One summer, a journalist arrived from the city. He sought to uncover the truth behind the superstition. He interviewed everyone, scoffing at their gentle faith. There are no spirits, he said, only stories for lonely hearts. But the villagers only pointed toward the forest. Curiosity led him to the hill one dusk. He found the old oak, the grave, the carved words. Sentimentality, he muttered, lighting a cigarette. Yet when the wind rose, the flame bent toward the woods. And faintly, a bell rang, though no one was near. That night, he dreamed of orange light beneath his window. He woke with tears he couldn't explain. The next morning, he left his notebook by the grave, and when he returned home, his articles never mocked again. Instead, he wrote, "There are truths that live beyond reason." Generations later, a child was born in the village, a girl named Leora. She loved wandering the woods, fearless and curious. Her parents warned her, "Don't stray too far. The fox still guards the hill," but Leora only smiled. "Then I'll thank him for watching over us." She had the same kindness Elena once carried. One day, she followed a trail of orange petals to the oak. There, a small fox cub sat, watching her quietly. Its fur shimmered like the setting sun. Without fear, she reached out her hand, and it didn't run. It sniffed her fingers and purred, low and warm. From that day, she visited often, bringing berries and songs. The fox cub grew, and so did her laughter. The villagers whispered that the bond had been reborn. They said Elena's spirit smiled that spring. The cycle of love had found its way again. Years passed, and Leora became a young woman. The fox, whom she named Ember, never left her side. He followed her through fields, across rivers, into dreams. Together, they rebuilt the old house beneath the oak. They called it the Keeper's Cottage. One autumn, Ember disappeared into the forest for days. Leora waited, heart aching with worry. When he returned, he carried something in his mouth, a small, red bell. Weathered, cracked, but unmistakably hers. He laid it in her hands, tail wagging softly. Tears filled her eyes as the bell rang once more. It was the sound of memory awakening. That night, she dreamed of Elena smiling beside the fire, and when she woke, the world felt gentler again. The fox had given her more than relics. He'd given her belonging. Leora grew old, but never alone. She tended the hill, teaching children to care for the earth. "Kindness," she said, "is the language the wild understands." Ember watched over her, his fur now touched by silver. They were two souls walking paths once tread by others. When she could no longer walk, he lay beside her porch. At dusk, she whispered, "When I go, don't grieve, my friend." He nuzzled her hand, unwilling to hear such words, but she smiled. "You'll find another. That's how love lives on." The bell on her table chimed in the wind, soft as breath. When she passed, the fox stayed by her for 3 days. Then he disappeared into the woods, his cry long and low. The villagers buried her beside Elena's grave. Now 2 names rested beneath the oak, and the hill became brighter every spring thereafter. To honor them, the villagers began a tradition. Each spring, they gathered beneath the oak with tiny red bells. They tied them to branches, letting the wind play their song. They called it the Festival of Bells, and they told their children the story of love that tamed the wild. The forest seemed to hum with approval. Foxes emerged from the trees, unafraid, curious. Children laughed and tossed flower petals in the air. The bells sang like laughter from the past. It was no longer legend, it was communion. Even the elders wept quietly that first year, because in every chime they heard her lullaby. And somewhere beyond the veil of time, 2 spirits listened. One human, one wild, together, eternal. The forest had become their sanctuary forevermore. A traveler passing through stopped during the festival. He was blind, guided only by the sound of the bells. He sat beneath the oak, smiling as the wind carried their song. "Who plays such a melody?" he asked. "The forest," a child said softly. The man nodded. "It feels like love." He stayed through the night, listening as the bells quieted. When morning came, he told the villagers his dream. "I saw them," he said, "an old woman, a girl, and a fox. They were light, pure, unending light." The villagers fell silent. They knew no one had told him their story. He smiled, raising his face to the breeze. "Some songs," he said, "can only be heard by the soul." And with that, he continued his journey. Seasons turned, but the forest never withered again. It flourished, wild yet peaceful, full of balance. Animals gathered near the hill as if drawn by unseen warmth. Birds nested above the graves, foxes played in the grass. The oak stood like a guardian, watching over all. Scientists came to study the phenomenon. They found richer soil, cleaner streams, calmer air. But the villagers only smiled and said, "It's love." Because how could science measure devotion that deep? They simply called it the Elena effect. Every spring the bells bloomed red against green leaves. Their sound carried across the valley like gentle laughter. And each year, a new fox cub was seen near the hill. Born wild, but with eyes too kind for the wilderness. The legend had become the heartbeat of nature itself. Centuries later, when the world had changed, the tale endured. People came from far lands to see the Hill of Bonds. Some left poems, others left silence and tears. They all heard the same thing, the faint ring of a bell in the wind. And for a moment, every heart believed again. Musicians wrote songs inspired by the story. Painters captured it in hues of fire and gold. Writers spoke of a fox that taught humanity gentleness. The legend was no longer about death or loss. It was about how love becomes the light that guides us home. And yet, some nights, when the moon hung low, locals claimed they saw movement beneath the oak. 2 figures walking together, slow, unhurried, eternal. The bell chimed once, clear and soft, then all went still, wrapped in peace. The story came full circle one quiet dawn. A young woman stood before the grave, tears in her eyes. She'd been told the tale since childhood, yet it felt personal now. Beside her stood a small orange fox, watching silently. It tilted its head, just like Sunny once did. She knelt, whispering, "Thank you for teaching us how to love." The fox brushed against her hand, warm, alive, real. And in that moment, she understood. The bond never ended, it simply passed on. Every act of kindness was their echo. As she turned to leave, the wind rose gently. The bell above her swayed and rang, clear as memory. Sunlight spilled across the hill, painting everything gold, and two shadows stretched together once more, a woman and her orange fox, walking into forever. Another century passed, yet the hill remained unchanged. The oak still stood strong, its branches a cathedral of green. Beneath it, the graves slept peacefully, side by side. Every spring, orange petals blanketed the earth like embers. The villagers called it the season when love blooms. People from distant lands came to witness the miracle. They brought no offerings of gold, only songs and silence. Children ran barefoot through the grass, laughing freely. No fences, no fear, only harmony between man and wild. The forest had learned peace from a single act of care. And high above, in the canopy's shifting light, a fox's silhouette sometimes appeared, watching, calm. The villagers didn't startle or pray, they smiled instead, because they knew what it meant. Some loves never fade, they simply take new shapes. On quiet evenings, the wind carried whispers through the valley. It spoke in fragments, like distant voices in song. Old ones claimed it was Elena's laughter, carried on the breeze. Others said it was the fox, calling softly to her still. Either way, the forest never truly felt alone. A poet once camped beneath the oak, hoping to hear it. He stayed up all night, listening to the wind's hymn. At dawn, he swore he heard her say, "Kindness never dies." And beside it, a low, gentle growl, like a purr from beyond. He left his pen there, saying, "Words can't improve perfection." The villagers found his tent days later, empty but undisturbed. In his place, they found a small orange feather, glimmering faintly. They took it as a sign, another verse in their living legend. And so the wind became sacred, a voice of love eternal. Every time it blew, the bells sang in harmony. Soon the forest became a place of pilgrimage, not for worship, but for remembrance. People seeking peace came to the hill, barefoot and humble. They whispered their sorrows beneath the oak, and somehow left lighter than when they arrived. A mother mourning her child swore she heard purring beside her. A soldier laid down his weapon after dreaming of the fox's eyes. A girl lost in grief felt a warmth brush her cheek. All of them spoke of the same comfort, gentle, unseen. The wild had become a healer. Guides marked the trail with signs reading, "Walk kindly." No temples, no idols, just the earth and wind. The fox's story had taught humanity what temples forgot, that love, once given, becomes part of the living world. And the forest, now alive with grace, breathed with them. One summer, lightning struck the forest. Flames spread fast, devouring roots and branches alike. The villagers ran, desperate to save the sacred hill. The air turned red, choking, violent, merciless. It felt as if nature itself was burning away its own heart. But as the fire neared the graves, it slowed. Wind shifted suddenly, blowing back toward the plains. Rain came from nowhere, thick and cleansing. And through the smoke, a single fox silhouette stood, unmoving. When dawn came, the oak still stood untouched. No one questioned miracles anymore. They simply rebuilt, planting new trees around the hill. And every sapling grew faster than nature allowed. The villagers said the fox had called the rain himself. Love, they said, protects what it creates. Decades later, a boy named Aaron was born near the valley. He loved animals, but none loved him back until one night. By the river, he found a fox cub tangled in reeds. Its fur was orange, its eyes bright as dawn. He freed it gently, and it followed him home. Aaron's parents gasped. Not again. they whispered, but the boy smiled. He's not dangerous. He's lonely. They couldn't argue. The cub never left his side. And when they played near the hill, the bell above rang softly, as if blessing their friendship. The cub grew strong, proud, and fiercely loyal. Together they roamed the forest paths, once guarded by Sunny. History, it seemed, had found another chapter, and the villagers began to whisper once more, "The keeper has returned." Aaron often dreamed of the past he never knew. He saw an old woman by a fire, smiling. He saw the first fox, proud and gentle beside her, and each time she whispered, "Remember us." When he woke, his fox was always watching. As he grew, he learned the stories. Elena, Leora, Ember, each one a thread in the tapestry of their shared destiny. He began tending the graves, clearing the leaves, fixing the stones. He felt peace there, as if surrounded by invisible friends. The forest spoke through rustling leaves, guiding him. One dusk, he placed his hand on the oak's bark. "I'll protect this place," he vowed softly. The wind stirred, and a bell chimed in response. And from the woods, dozens of fox eyes glowed faintly. The wild had accepted him as one of its own. Aaron grew into a man, and his fox into a legend. He gathered people from nearby towns, telling them the tale. Together, they built wooden benches beneath the oak, not for worship, but for stories, songs, and silence. It became a gathering of peace called the Day of Unity. Each year, people came from every corner of the land. They brought their differences and left them behind. For one day, they shared only gratitude for love, for nature, for memory. The bells above sang endlessly, their sound rich and golden. The forest seemed to breathe in harmony with them. When night fell, foxes gathered quietly around the humans. Children fed them by hand, without fear. The divide between wild and man dissolved completely, and Aaron stood beneath the stars, smiling. "This," he whispered, "is what she dreamed of." Time, as it always does, moved on. Aaron aged, his hair silvering like moonlit grass, but his fox, now ancient, never left him. Together they grew slower, quieter, content. The world around them modernized, but the hills stayed timeless. One evening he sensed his end approaching. He sat beneath the oak, stroking his companion's fur. "Will you stay here, old friend?" he murmured. The fox leaned closer, resting its head on his knee. No words were needed. When dawn came, villagers found them both, peaceful, side by side. They buried Aaron beside the others, the final keeper. The fox vanished into the trees, never seen again, but the forest grew brighter that spring, and the bells rang for 3 days straight. No one knows how many centuries have passed since. The forest remains eternal and untouched by time. Tourists visit, scientists study, artists paint, yet none capture its soul, because some truths cannot be analyzed, only felt. And there, the wind still carries 2 heartbeats. Sometimes the sunlight through the leaves forms strange shapes. 2 shadows, a woman and a fox, walking together. Each step they take fills the air with shimmering light. Birds go silent, as if paying respect to something sacred. And for that moment, the world remembers. They say the wild glows orange at sunset for a reason, that it's not just the sun, but the echo of their love, a love that tamed the storm, healed the land, and never died. A love that became the light that warms the world, the light that whispers, "Be kind." Night falls softly on the valley one final time. The forest hums, alive with memory and grace. Beneath the eternal oak, the earth breathes slowly, peaceful. A faint jingle rises in the breeze, blending with the rustling leaves, and 2 shapes appear once more in the moonlight. The woman bends down, smiling. "You kept your promise." The fox looks up, eyes shimmering like twin stars. They walk together through the mist, no longer apart. No words, no goodbyes, just endless understanding. Every step leaves trails of light in the grass, and as the first light of dawn kisses the hill, the world feels gentler, as if held by unseen hands. The bells ring once, twice, then fade into the horizon. Their love, now bound to the wind, becomes eternal song. And somewhere, forever, an orange fox guards her memory still.